calm is not weakness. And that misunderstanding, that pervasive cultural myth, is one of the most dangerous ideas circulating in modern discourse. We've come to associate calmness with passivity, with timidity, even with a kind of emotional fragility. But that's a fundamental misreading of what calm truly is. Calm isn't the absence of emotion, nor is it the refusal to engage. Calm is the discipline of strength under control. It is the deliberate choice to remain composed when every instinct, every provocation, every external pressure is pulling you toward reactivity. Now think about that, because to remain calm in the face of chaos, in the face of insult or provocation, that takes a staggering amount of internal structure. A person who can maintain composure when everything is threatening to fall apart isn't weak. They're formidable. They are not without emotion, but they have learned not to be slaves to it. They have trained themselves to delay impulsivity, to observe before acting, and to hold the line between stimulus and response. That space between what happens to you and how you respond, that is where mastery lives. That's where high achievement becomes possible. You don't rise to greatness by being loud or explosive or dominant in a superficial sense. You rise to greatness by being able to sustain a direction, especially when everything around you is trying to knock you off course. That requires something deeper than charisma. It requires depth of character, it requires clarity of purpose, and it requires composure. Because chaos is guaranteed, crisis is guaranteed, failure, betrayal, exhaustion, all guaranteed. The only question is, what do you become when it hits? Now, most people, when pressure enters the room, they leave their values at the door. They start reacting, blaming, scrambling. They abandon responsibility for the comfort of outrage. But the person who remains calm, who stays tethered to the truth, who doesn't flinch, they become something else entirely. They become a center of gravity. People notice them. They're drawn to them. Not because they're shouting, but because they're still. And stillness in a storm is power. You'll see this dynamic in leadership all the time. The calm voice, the one that doesn't escalate, doesn't panic, that voice becomes the authority. Why? Because calm implies control. It signals that this person is not just reacting blindly, they are thinking, and that is rare. It's rare, but it's trainable, which means it's not about being born with a certain temperament. It's about the choices you make every day. When you're insulted, when you're ignored, when life fails to meet your expectations, do you lash out? Or do you observe, breathe, and then speak from intention rather than impulse? High achievers know this instinctively, or they learn it the hard way. They learn that the ability to delay gratification, and that's what calm really is, by the way, delayed emotional gratification, that ability is the foundation of success in every domain. Business, relationships, creative work, physical training, it's all the same principle. The one who can endure discomfort without surrendering their core values, that's the person who makes it. But here's the paradox. Calm looks quiet. Calm looks like nothing is happening. But internally, it's the opposite. It's dynamic restraint. There's a flurry of emotional energy being processed, sorted, and mastered in real time. And because that process is invisible, it's easy to overlook. But you shouldn't. You should recognize it for what it is, power in its most refined form. That's why calm people win. Because while others are scrambling to dominate the room or prove their worth, the calm individual is evaluating the long game. They're seeing 3 moves ahead. They're aware of the emotional traps being set, the bait for attention, the pressure to react, and they don't bite. Because they're not hunting for temporary dominance. They're building something bigger than ego. They're building legacy, integrity, vision. And that doesn't mean they never speak with fire. On the contrary, when calm people do raise their voice, it lands with impact. Because people know this person doesn't yell unless it matters. This person doesn't shake unless something serious is happening. So when they do speak up, people listen. That's the power of earned authority. It's not about volume, it's about trust. And trust is built through consistency, through steadiness, through the kind of strength that doesn't need to advertise itself. So, if you're someone who's been told your calm nature is a liability, think again. You may be holding the very quality that this chaotic world is most desperate for, but it has to be developed. It has to be disciplined, because calm is not apathy. It is not avoidance. Calm is the sharpened blade of wisdom, knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to walk away. And here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. Calm can't be faked. It's not a performance. You either earn it or you don't. And the only way to earn it is by facing difficulty again and again without losing who you are in the process. That's where calm comes from. That's where power is born. So the next time you feel the urge to react, to shout, to defend, ask yourself, what would it look like to stay calm here? Not because you're afraid, but because you're strong enough not to be dragged into the mud. That's the real test. That's the difference between noise and substance. And if you can become the calm in the storm, not just for yourself, but for others, then you don't just win, you lead. When people talk about power, they often think about the obvious forms: dominance, aggression, status, wealth. But what they fail to realize is that true power is not loud. It doesn't announce itself with theatrics. It moves quietly, strategically, almost invisibly. And perhaps the most overlooked and underestimated form of power is emotional self-regulation. The ability to remain calm in a moment that demands chaos from you. That is not just strength, that is leverage. Because when you don't react, you control the frame. This is something most people don't understand. In any emotionally charged interaction, an argument, a negotiation, a crisis, there's always a frame. And the person who holds the frame holds the power. What is a frame? It's the unspoken rule book of the interaction. It's the emotional tone, the direction of attention, the perceived status of each participant. The frame tells everyone who's leading and who's following, who's influencing and who's being influenced. And calm people, if they know what they're doing, hold the frame. Why? Because they don't get pulled into emotional reactivity. They're not scrambling to defend themselves. They're not trying to outspeak, outshout, or outperform the chaos. They just are. And that presence, that rootedness is felt, not intellectually, but viscerally. It communicates, you will not rattle me. You can flail, you can insult, you can throw your weight around, but I'm not playing your game. That's incredibly powerful because it breaks the emotional loop that narcissists, manipulators, and even well-meaning but reactive people try to trap you in. The loop says, I escalate, you escalate. I panic, you panic. I lash out, you lash back. It's a psychological chain reaction, and most people play along without even realizing it. But the calm person sees the game being played, and instead of responding, they observe. That changes everything. Now, observation is not passivity. It's a higher order function. It means you're stepping out of the storm and looking at it from above. You're not lost in the emotion. You're tracking it. That ability alone elevates you in the hierarchy of competence and maturity, and people feel that. They don't always know how to describe it, but they sense it. It's the reason calm people often become natural leaders, not because they dominate others, but because others instinctively trust them to stay grounded when things fall apart. It's not charisma in the traditional sense. It's not charm or magnetism. It's stability. In a world addicted to drama, people crave emotional consistency. They want to know someone can hold the frame when they can't. That's what the calm person offers. But again, this isn't about temperament. This isn't about being naturally quiet or soft-spoken. Some of the calmest people I've met are also the fiercest, but their fire is focused. It's governed. Calm doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. What it means is that you don't react. You respond deliberately from principle. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone challenges you unfairly, maybe even publicly. Now, the instinct, the primitive limbic brain instinct, is to defend, retaliate, restore your status. But the higher self, the composed self, sees the trap. It knows that the first to lose composure loses credibility. So instead of firing back, you hold still. You let the silence do some of the work. You gather your thoughts, you assess the situation, and then you speak, not from defensiveness, but from clarity. In that moment, you have just shifted the frame. You've gone from being the attacked to being the one who determines the tone of the room. People will remember that. They won't remember what was said. as much as they'll remember who remained composed. This is not just social strategy, it's psychological sovereignty, and it extends far beyond boardrooms or conflict. It applies to relationships, to parenting, to personal growth, because the principle is universal. The less reactive you are, the more influence you have over yourself and others. But there's a deeper point here, and this is where philosophy comes in. Why does calm work? Why does it carry this invisible authority? The answer is existential, because calm is rooted in truth. The calm person is ideally grounded in something real. They don't need to perform or impress. They know who they are. And in a world that's increasingly confused, unstable, and performative, that kind of groundedness shines like a beacon. So when you train yourself to hold the frame, not through force but through stillness, you're not just managing interactions, you're shaping the world around you. You become a stabilizing force. You become the person people turn to when things break down. And that's not just a psychological trick, that's a profound responsibility. Calm people win not because they overpower others, but because they become unshakable. And in a world built on quicksand, that's what lasts. So ask yourself, in this moment, this challenge, this relationship, am I holding the frame or am I handing it over? Because the one who holds the frame shapes the world. One of the most misunderstood ideas in modern discourse is that calmness is synonymous with weakness. That if you're not loud, not aggressive, not visibly dominant, you're somehow lesser, less assertive, less capable, less respected. But that's a fundamental misreading of what calmness actually is. Because calmness, real calmness, is not the absence of power, it's the mastery of it. Let's get something clear. It takes no strength to explode, no courage to panic, no discipline to lash out. Those are the reflexes of someone who's not in control. They might appear powerful in the moment. Maybe they even intimidate people, but it's reactive, not stable. And anything built on reaction is fragile. It doesn't endure. True strength is not the capacity to destroy. It's the ability to hold back, to contain, to choose not to escalate when every part of you is screaming to do so. That's why calm people win, because when chaos comes knocking, and it always does, they don't crumble, they don't scatter, they don't flail, they stand. And in doing so, they change the dynamic of the room, the interaction, the situation. Their presence becomes an anchor. And that's not poetic exaggeration. That's psychological reality. People subconsciously calibrate their own behavior based on the emotional signals of those around them. And when they encounter someone who is internally still, they adjust. They either settle down or they become exposed by contrast. This is what you see in high-stakes environments, military commanders under fire, ER doctors in the middle of trauma, negotiators handling hostages. The ones who lead, the ones who make decisions that matter, are not the ones with the most adrenaline. They're the ones with the most composure. And that's not a personality trait. That's a cultivated skill. So when we say calm people win, we're not talking about a preference for quiet personalities. We're pointing to a way of being in the world that maximizes your ability to think clearly, to act effectively, and to navigate complexity without being consumed by it. That's not a soft skill, that's a survival skill. It's an elite competency in a culture that's addicted to reactivity. But here's the challenge. Calmness isn't flashy. It doesn't advertise itself. You don't walk into a room and say, "Look how calm I am." It shows up in moments. When someone insults you and you choose not to engage. When plans fall apart and you adapt rather than panic. When you're under scrutiny and you don't flinch. These aren't dramatic victories, but they're decisive ones. Because every time you respond instead of react, you reinforce your own inner architecture. You become more resilient, more reliable, and less manipulated by circumstances beyond your control. And manipulation is key here, because we live in a world that's constantly trying to provoke you. Media, marketing, politics, even interpersonal relationships. If someone can make you react, they own a part of you. They control your direction. But if you remain calm, you remain free. Calmness is autonomy. It's the refusal to be governed by forces that don't serve your highest values. And it's contagious. You've probably noticed this. If you're in a group and one person starts to panic, it spreads. But so does calm. It doesn't dominate, it stabilizes. And people remember that. They may not remember what you said or how you said it, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And calm people, when they're genuine, make others feel safer because they carry the weight of order into disordered spaces. Now, this doesn't mean calmness is passive. In fact, the calmest people I know are the ones who are most capable of decisive action, but their actions aren't impulsive, they're intentional because they've trained themselves to wait, to listen, to observe, and only then to move. That's not hesitation, that's precision. And that's the shift I want you to make. Stop thinking of calm as retreat. Start thinking of it as command. Calmness doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It means you decide when and how to act, based not on emotion but on principle. You stop being a puppet of your feelings and you become a steward of them. That's what high achievers do. That's why they can endure setbacks that would break others. Because they're not ruled by their circumstances, they're ruled by something deeper, something centered. So the next time you're challenged, whether by conflict, pressure, or uncertainty, don't ask yourself, how do I win this moment? Ask, how do I stay rooted in who I am? Because if you can do that, you're already winning. You're already demonstrating the kind of control that most people will never access, not because they're incapable, but because they never saw calmness as power. They never saw that composure is not just a trait, it's a strategy, a quiet revolution against the chaos of the modern world. So remember this, calm isn't silence. Calm is strength. Calm is leadership. Calm is the edge that never dulls, the weapon that never breaks. In a world full of noise, be the stillness that speaks volumes. One of the deepest advantages of calmness, and one we rarely talk about with the seriousness it deserves, is how it enhances perception, how it sharpens your attention in a way that frantic energy never could. You see, when people are agitated, when they're emotionally reactive, their perception narrows, their field of awareness collapses in on whatever triggered the response. They fixate, they tunnel in, and they miss everything else. But calm people, they widen the frame. Calmness opens the aperture of perception. It lets you take in more information, subtle cues, inconsistencies, nuances in language and behavior, things that reactive minds miss entirely. In a state of calm, you aren't just hearing the words someone says, you're noticing how they say them, why they chose those words, and more importantly, you're noticing how all of that fits together across time. Patterns emerge, strategies reveal themselves. You see the game being played, not just the move being made. This is crucial in high-stakes situations, whether you're negotiating, managing a crisis, or navigating complex relationships. When you're calm, you don't just respond to what's happening. You understand why it's happening. That gives you a decisive strategic edge. You're not on the back foot, always catching up. You're anticipating, you're positioning, you're choosing your timing with intent, and that changes the game entirely. Let's take a simple example. Someone insults you in public. The reactive person either fires back or retreats, but the calm person, they observe. They don't feel compelled to act immediately. They assess. Was this about me or about them? What's the deeper insecurity here? What's their goal? And most importantly, what's my best move given that understanding? This isn't passivity. This is power through clarity. You can't buy that clarity with aggression. You can only earn it with restraint. And here's where it gets psychological. Calmness isn't just a tactic, it's a sign that your internal system is regulated. When your nervous system is calm, your brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, functions optimally. That's the part responsible for rational thought, executive decision-making, moral judgment, and long-term planning. But the second you get emotionally hijacked, angry, anxious, defensive, your brain shifts resources towards survival, and the prefrontal cortex gets overridden. You literally lose access to your highest cognitive functions. So when someone says, I just wasn't thinking straight, that's not a metaphor, it's biology. And it's avoidable. Calm people win because they stay online. They stay in command of their faculties. They make decisions from a place of full access, not instinctual override. That's not just a personality difference, it's neurological advantage. Now let's connect that back to influence. If you want to be effective, if you want to lead, to persuade, to shape outcomes, you must perceive more than others perceive. You must be the one who sees the forest when everyone else is chasing trees. And calmness is the precondition for that expanded awareness. Without it, you're just another voice in the noise, but with it, you become the one who actually sees what's going on underneath the noise, and that's when people start to listen. It's ironic, isn't it, that the loudest people often understand the least, that those who talk the most are often the least tuned into the dynamics they're actually in, because they're not seeing, they're projecting, they're not observing, they're reacting. But when you're calm, you're neither chasing nor retreating. You're simply watching. And in that stillness, you start to notice how everything connects, where the tension is, where the leverage is, where the moment is asking for you to act and where it's asking for you to wait. And sometimes waiting is the action, sometimes silence is the move. That's a kind of discipline most people can't fathom because they haven't trained themselves to endure the tension of not filling every moment with noise. But calm people, they're at peace with silence. They're not driven by the urge to control every variable. They let the space speak, and because of that, they often end up hearing what no one else could. This is why calm people are often underestimated at first. They don't flash, they don't posture, they're not trying to impress you. They're just there, anchored, aware, attuned. But over time, their presence becomes undeniable. They're the ones who don't fall apart under pressure. They're the ones who see things coming before others even know there's a threat. They're the ones whose advice starts to sound more like foresight. That's not coincidence. That's perception, amplified by calm. So if you want to operate at the highest level, not just personally, but professionally, relationally, spiritually, you need to prioritize this, the cultivation of inner stillness. Not as an aesthetic, not as a brand, but as a tool of awareness. You have to become the kind of person who sees before they speak, who listens before they move, who understands before they act. That kind of person becomes indispensable in any environment because calmness isn't just the absence of chaos, it's the presence of vision. And when you learn to see with clarity while others are blinded by emotion, you don't just win, you lead quietly, relentlessly, and with precision. There's something profound and often misunderstood about the way calm individuals exert influence. It's not overt, it's not flashy, it's not attention-seeking or domineering. In fact, it can be so subtle that you miss it unless you know what you're looking for. But once you do see it, you realize something very few people are willing to admit. The people who speak softly often carry the sharpest edge. Why? Because calmness itself radiates authority. Now think about that for a moment. We tend to associate power with volume, with dominance, with charisma that fills a room. And sure, those things have their place, but they're often brittle. They depend on external conditions, on being seen, on being heard, on being obeyed. Strip that away and there's not much left. But calm authority is different. It comes from within. It isn't derived from spectacle, it's rooted in self-mastery, and that kind of power is sustainable. See, when a calm person speaks, people listen, not because they demand attention, but because they've earned it. Their words aren't trying to outpace their insecurity. They don't need to prove something with every sentence. There's a stillness in them, and that stillness draws people in. Because we live in a noisy world, a frantic world, a world obsessed with urgency and validation, and someone who doesn't flinch in the face of chaos, someone who doesn't get swept away by the current, they become magnetic. They become the anchor in the storm. Now here's the psychological piece you need to understand. People are wired to follow certainty. It's not even always about who's right. It's about who seems certain. The calm person communicates certainty not by being rigid, but by being composed. Their nervous system isn't screaming. Their eyes aren't darting. Their voice doesn't tremble. There's a centeredness there, a grounded energy that says, I'm not rattled, and I won't be. That alone establishes dominance, not in a controlling sense, but in a way that commands trust. Because if you're calm under pressure, people believe you know what you're doing, and that belief is powerful. Think of it this way. When something goes wrong, most people look to someone to tell them what to do. The room gets quiet and everyone waits, not for the loudest voice, not for the most emotional reaction, but for the person whose presence makes the chaos feel manageable. That's influence, not forced, not manipulated, emanated, and it's available only to those who've developed internal discipline, those who have trained themselves to resist the animal urge to react. And this is where things get really interesting, because calm influence isn't just interpersonal, it's strategic. It's deeply situationally aware. The calm person sees things that others miss, and because of that, they know where to intervene. They're not wasting energy. They're not flailing. They act precisely, intentionally, and in doing so, they change the direction of events without making a scene. Now let's go a layer deeper. Calmness allows you to become a kind of psychological mirror. When someone is emotionally escalated and they meet calmness, it disrupts them. It creates dissonance. Their nervous system expects a matching reaction, conflict, defensiveness, reactivity, but instead it encounters stillness. And in that stillness, their behavior is reflected back to them with uncomfortable clarity. You don't need to shame them. You don't need to retaliate. You just stand there, calm and collected, and their own behavior starts to look absurd. That's a form of confrontation that bypasses argument entirely. And it works. It's also disarming, because calmness is unpredictable in a reactive world. People prepare for pushback. They expect retaliation. But when you remain calm, they lose their script. And that opens a gap, a moment of uncertainty, of confusion. And in that moment, if you're sharp enough, you can shift the power dynamic entirely. But, and this is critical, it only works if your calm is genuine. People can smell inauthenticity. If your stillness is an act, a performance masking suppressed rage or fear, it won't hold. Eventually it cracks. True calm influence comes from inner congruence, from a mind and body that are in alignment, that have faced tension and not collapsed under it. That's why it must be trained. You can't fake this. You have to earn it. So the question becomes, how do you cultivate that level of calm? It starts by confronting your own reactivity, by noticing when and why you're triggered, by refusing to let impulse override intention. It requires you to sit with discomfort without flinching, to watch your own emotions rise and fall without being consumed by them. Over time, you become less governed by stimulus and more anchored in response. That's the transition from reactivity to leadership. And the beauty is, it scales. The more calm you become internally, the more influence you exert externally. Not because you're trying to dominate, but because your presence speaks louder than your performance. That's what separates the people who merely look powerful from those who actually are. So here's the truth. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more clarity, and clarity lives in calm. When you become the calmest person in the room, you become the one who sees furthest, speaks least, and moves last, but moves with impact. And that's when you stop reacting to life and start shaping it. One of the most underestimated truths about calm people, the ones who seem unshaken in the face of chaos, is that their calmness isn't merely a personality trait. It's a strategy, a cultivated discipline. But more than that, it becomes something else entirely when pushed to its edge, a form of resilience that bends the world around it. What most people don't see is that in moments of high stress, when the stakes are real and the pressure is thick, it is calmness, not aggression, not dominance, that becomes the ultimate force multiplier. It gives you the space to act deliberately while others are caught in their emotional reflexes. That's what allows calm people to win, not because they're lucky or naturally composed, but because they've chosen to be unshakable. Let's be very precise about something here. The calm person isn't passive. This is a common misconception. Calm is often mistaken for inaction, for detachment, for softness, but this is a dangerous misread. In truth, the calm person is the one who is least passive because they are not being led around by their instincts. They are not reacting out of fear or anger or social pressure. Instead, they are choosing their response. That's the essence of agency. And without agency, you're not really alive. You're just a collection of automatic reactions to stimuli you barely understand. What calm allows you to do, especially in high-stakes environments, is reclaim sovereignty over your nervous system. And this is crucial because when your nervous system is hijacked by fear, by ego, by urgency, you lose clarity. You make poor decisions. You speak words you regret. You become a hostage to the moment rather than its master. But calm people reverse that dynamic. They become the architects of the moment, and the world bends around them because, quite frankly, people trust calm, people follow calm, and people fear calm when it refuses to be provoked. Now, think about that in terms of leadership. The greatest leaders in history, whether military, political, philosophical, even spiritual, were not the ones who shouted the loudest or struck the hardest. They were the ones who stayed composed when everyone else was losing their grip. They were the ones who didn't confuse motion with progress, who could sit in silence longer than anyone else. And when they did speak, they said something that changed the course of the conversation. That is not charisma. That's not even wisdom in the conventional sense. That's calmness forged through trial. And here's the philosophical core of it. Calmness is rooted in meaning. You cannot remain calm unless you know why you're doing what you're doing. Without a why, you'll panic. You'll collapse into distraction. You'll seek relief instead of resolution. But if you have a clear sense of purpose, something that orients you, that gives shape to your suffering, then even the most chaotic storm becomes navigable. You're not just enduring chaos, you're moving through it. And others sense that. It's deeply human to want to be near someone who knows where they're going when the path gets dark. Calm people radiate that kind of direction, even if they say nothing. This brings us to something even more profound. Calmness, when fully developed, becomes contagious. It's a transmission. When you walk into a room with grounded energy, people feel it, and they adjust. You don't even have to speak. Your body language, your presence, the way you hold silence, it all speaks for you. In a conflict, it de-escalates. In a negotiation, it disarms. In a crisis, it stabilizes. And in all of those cases, calmness wins, not because it overpowers, but because it transcends the reactive game everyone else is playing. And there's something inherently admirable about that. People respect calm because deep down, they know how difficult it is. They know what it costs. They know it's not the default. And so when someone carries that kind of composure, it signals mastery, not just of emotions, but of attention, of time, of the self. It says, I've done the inner work, and I'm not here to compete with your chaos. I'm here to outlast it. That changes the energy of the entire environment. But let's not idealize this to the point of detachment. Calmness doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't flee from what you feel. You sit with it, you understand it, you harness it, and then you act. That's the difference. Calm doesn't suppress emotion. It integrates it. It brings order to it. And that's what allows you to remain functional, even powerful, when others are drowning in the storm of their own reactions. So what does all of this mean in practical terms? It means that calmness is a form of leadership. It means that when you choose to stay composed, when you breathe instead of bark, when you observe instead of react, you create options for yourself and for others. You generate space. And in that space, the best decisions are made. The most lasting wins are achieved. The most respected leaders emerge. Here's the closing thought. Calmness is not just a trait. It's a choice, a discipline, a daily practice of ordering your inner world so that you can impact the outer one. In a reactive society, calm people are not weak. They are the ones still standing when the dust settles. So become the calm in the chaos, and the chaos will never control you.